There are voices that don't just sing, they heal. For millions across generations, Bill Gaither was that voice. He wasn't merely a gospel artist, he was the calm in someone's storm, the warmth in their coldest night, and the hope in their darkest hour. Through his music, he gave people something to hold on to when life felt too heavy. His songs didn't just stay in churches or concert halls. They found their way into living rooms, hospital beds, prison cells, and tear-streaked pillows. For so many, Bill Gaither was a gentle reminder that God hadn't forgotten them. He didn't need flashy lights or fame. His presence alone was enough. With his kind smile, the kind that made you feel safe, and his voice, time seemed to slow. His words weren't just lyrics, they were prayers, psalms. Songs like "Because He Lives" didn't just top gospel charts, they saved lives. They gave strength to the sick, comfort to the grieving, and faith to those who had lost their way. Yet even through it all, Bill never changed. He remained humble, kind, and soft-spoken. The world saw him as the man who had it all together, strong in faith, rich in wisdom, deeply loved. But even the brightest lights cast shadows. As loved as he was, there was always a quiet sadness behind his eyes, a kind of ache that never made it to the spotlight. Bill never spoke much about himself. He smiled through interviews, avoided hard questions, and gently redirected conversations. Most people respected his privacy. But those who listened closely could feel it, something unspoken, something carried in silence. Rumors swirled around him, quiet whispers that followed him like a faint echo. A close friend who vanished from his circle. A bond broken without warning. A truth buried for years. Fans never pushed, but deep down, many wondered if there was more to his story than he ever let on. Now, at 88, Bill Gaither is nearing the final chapter of a life that changed the world. His steps are slower, his voice carries the weight of time. He no longer seeks the stage. Instead, he finds peace in stillness, in memories, in prayer, and in the company of those who remained. And after all these years, with a full heart and a fragile voice, he's finally ready to share the truth that lived in the quiet corners of his soul. Before the world knew his name, before the sold-out concerts, the standing ovations, and the awards, Bill Gaither was just a young man with a guitar, a notebook full of lyrics, and a heart full of dreams. Those early days were tough. Money was tight. Nights were long. And gospel music wasn't exactly embraced by the mainstream. But Bill kept writing, kept singing, kept believing that, somehow, someone would hear. He wasn't alone. His wife, Gloria, stood beside him, his partner in marriage, his partner in purpose. Together, they wrote songs late into the night, sometimes with only a single lamp glowing in their small living room. They prayed over every lyric, asking God to use their music for something greater than themselves. But while their songs comforted others, the road behind them was often lonely. There were moments they almost gave up, times when the bills piled higher than the blessings. Gloria cried herself to sleep some nights, and Bill quietly wondered if the calling was worth it. Friends drifted away. Some family members didn't understand. And while the world would one day see the glory, they never saw the cost. Bill missed birthdays, anniversaries, even funerals, all for the sake of the calling. All for the music that kept pulling him forward. But perhaps the hardest sacrifice wasn't what he gave up, it was what he lost without meaning to. In the pursuit of his dream, something else quietly broke. The bond with someone who had once been like a brother. A fellow musician, a friend he started out with. Their connection had seemed unshakable, until Bill's name rose higher. The friendship began to slip through the cracks. A few missed calls. A canceled meeting. A miscommunication here and there. And then one day, silence. Bill never spoke about it. Not to the press, not even to those closest to him. But the absence lingered. It echoed in his songs, lingered in his prayers. He told himself it was just part of the price. Some things had to be let go for the greater good. But deep inside, he never truly let go. As the years passed, and the applause kept coming, that quiet loss remained, a shadow behind the spotlight. No one asked. No one knew. And now, looking back at 88, Bill doesn't remember the awards as much as the moments he missed, the people he lost, the words he never said, and most of all, the silence that grew where love once lived. For most, Bill Gaither was untouchable. A man of God. A musical genius. A humble leader. But even in the most faithful circles, not everything is as perfect as it seems. In the quiet corners of the gospel community, whispers began. They weren't loud, they weren't cruel, but they were there, soft questions, half-spoken thoughts, memories that didn't quite add up. People began to notice the absence of someone from Bill's early days. A singer, a friend, a voice that once stood beside him on stage. There were no announcements, no goodbyes, just silence. Fans who had followed the Gaither vocal band from the start felt the gap, but no one dared to ask why Bill never mentioned it. The group continued as if nothing had changed, but those who paid attention knew something was off. Some quietly wondered if there had been a falling out, others thought maybe the friend had walked away from music altogether. But those closest to the gospel scene knew better. They remembered how the two men had once been inseparable, how their voices had blended like family, how their laughter had filled green rooms before the shows. It wasn't just professional, it was personal. The sudden distance didn't feel like a simple career shift, it felt like a wound. Over time, the questions turned into stories, the stories into quiet rumors. No one wanted to accuse Bill. His character was too strong, his kindness too genuine. But still, why had he never acknowledged the absence? Why had he never tried to set the record straight? Gospel music is built on truth and grace, yet for the first time, it felt as if there was a secret hiding behind the songs. Some said the other man had struggled. Money, health, his own demons. Maybe Bill, in his rise to fame, didn't want to be weighed down by someone else's burdens. Others believed the split was about pride, two strong voices, one spotlight, and a decision that pushed one man forward while leaving the other behind. No matter the theories, one thing was certain, something had happened. Only Bill knew the full story. And through it all, he remained silent. He kept singing, kept writing, and as the years passed, the whispers faded, slowly becoming background noise. But they never completely disappeared. They lingered in the pauses between his words, in the emotions behind his songs. The audience clapped. The tours sold out. But those who had been there from the start still wondered. They wondered what had happened, who had been hurt, and most of all, why the man who had spent his life singing about truth had never shared this one. Some truths don't shout. They sit quietly in the heart, year after year, growing heavier with time. For Bill Gaither, there was one such truth, a deep, unspoken truth that stayed with him through the decades. It aged like a quiet shadow, never loud, never obvious, but always present. He had carried it since his youth, back when his music was just beginning to reach people, when life was full of promise, and his dreams were starting to bloom. Back then, he never imagined the weight one decision could carry for the rest of his life. He thought time would fix it, that silence would protect everyone involved. But as success grew, the silence didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like distance and guilt. The secret wasn't scandalous. It wasn't something you'd find in tabloids or gossip columns. No, it was something far more painful. It was about love, about loyalty, about the kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream but simply lingers. Behind every song, behind every standing ovation, there was a name he never mentioned. A face that faded from the public eye but never from his mind. A friend, a brother in Christ, a man who had stood beside him in faith, struggle, and song. Until one moment, one choice, changed everything. Bill had chosen the music, and in doing so, he had walked away from someone who had helped build the foundation of his journey. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't betrayal. It was fear. Fear that addressing the cracks would shatter the whole wall. Fear that admitting the truth would change how people saw him. So he smiled. He kept moving forward. He told himself he was doing what God had called him to do. And maybe he was. But even amidst all that purpose, there was pain. In quiet moments backstage, in hotel rooms alone, on long flights, he thought about what he had lost. He replayed the conversations that never happened, the apology he never gave, the hug that never came. It haunted him, not in a dramatic way, but in small, aching flashes, a song lyric that reminded him of their harmonies, a city they once visited together, a crowd that once cheered for them both. He told himself it was too late. After so many years, some things were better left unsaid. But in the silence of growing older, when the noise of the world began to fade and the applause became a distant echo, the truth grew louder. Now, at 88, with the weight of time pressing gently on his shoulders, that secret no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a responsibility. A story that needed to be told, not to clear his name, not to relive the past, but to honor the one person who had quietly walked away so that Bill could keep walking forward. Because some truths don't need to be hidden. Some truths deserve to be spoken, even if they come late. 88 years. That's a long time to carry something. There are moments in life when we carry something in our hearts for years, never saying it out loud. But eventually, the world slows down. The spotlight fades. And in that quiet space, the soul speaks more clearly than ever before. For Bill Gaither, that moment came in the most unexpected way. It wasn't on a grand stage. It wasn't a press conference. It was a simple afternoon, just a chair by the window, a notebook in his lap, the sun casting a soft glow across family photos. Surrounded by the life he had built, Bill was finally ready to speak. Not as an icon, not as a performer, but simply as a man. He began with a letter. At first, just a few words. But soon, memories began to flow, painful, beautiful, and honest memories of a friend he had loved like a brother. A bond torn apart by fame and fear. Years passed, and both men waited, silently, for the other to break the silence. With trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, Bill wrote what had lived in his heart for over 50 years. I was wrong to let our silence last this long. I thought I was protecting us. I thought time would heal what I didn't have the courage to face. But time doesn't heal silence, it only makes it louder. I should have called. I should have apologized. You helped build something beautiful. And I walked away when things got complicated. I chose the stage when I should have chosen you. And I've missed you every single day since. That letter wasn't meant for the world. It was personal. But, as stories often do, it made its way out into the open. And when it did, something powerful happened. Fans didn't judge him. They didn't turn away. They wept with him because they understood. Everyone at some point has let someone slip away. Everyone carries a regret they wish they could rewrite. And suddenly, the man who had healed so many with his music was being healed by his own honesty. At 88, Bill Gaither no longer needed to protect his image. He had nothing left to prove. But he had something to give, the truth. Not the kind that wins awards, but the kind that touches hearts. The kind that reminds people it's never too late to speak the words left unsaid, to ask for forgiveness, and to let love speak after years of silence. For years, the world had heard only one side of the story, the side of Bill Gaither, the gospel legend whose music touched millions. But there was another side. Another man who had lived in the shadows of that story. A man who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Bill, writing songs, sharing dreams, and building a future together. His name wasn't whispered much anymore. Not like Bill's. But to Bill, this man wasn't just a fellow musician, he was family. His absence wasn't a choice, at least not in the way Bill thought. It was a hurt deeper than just missing a tour or a song. It was a silence, cold and quiet, born from a decision Bill had made long ago. A decision that left his friend behind. As Bill climbed the ladder of success, chasing a dream that seemed too big to ignore, his friend stood still, watching from the sidelines. At first, it wasn't hard. He understood the demands of the music industry. He understood the sacrifices. But over time, the distance between them grew. Bill became more than just a colleague. He became an icon. And the man who had once been his closest confidant was left to watch as the world adored someone else. In the beginning, it wasn't anger that simmered, it was confusion. Why had Bill changed? Why had their once strong bond fractured without a word? There was no confrontation, no blowout fight, just a slow, painful drift. No phone calls. No messages. No apologies. Just silence. And with that silence came a creeping feeling of being forgotten, of being cast aside for the sake of something bigger than their friendship. The years that followed weren't easy. Bill's rising fame and the constant demand for his music were relentless. But in the quiet of his life, this man was left with a deep ache, one that time or work couldn't soothe. He had always been there for Bill, ready to back him up, sing with him, pray with him. But when the lights grew brighter and the world sang Bill's name, he felt himself fading into the background, becoming nothing more than a memory in someone else's story. There were moments of resentment, but no bitterness. Not really. Just a quiet sadness, one that hung over everything. A sadness that whispered in the spaces between Bill's music, "I was there. I helped build this. And now I'm forgotten." But he never said it out loud. That wasn't who he was. He wasn't the kind of man to beg for attention or demand answers. He carried his pain in silence, just as Bill had carried his own secret. But deep inside, he missed his friend. And no matter how many years passed or how many songs Bill sang, he knew there was one thing that could never be replaced: the bond they had shared, the love they had built, and the friendship that was slowly being buried. At first, it wasn't anger, but confusion. Why had Bill changed? Why had their bond, strong in the beginning, suddenly fractured without a word? There was no confrontation, no dramatic fallout, just a slow, painful drift. No phone calls. No messages. No apologies. Just silence. And with that silence came a creeping feeling. A feeling of being forgotten, cast aside for something bigger than their friendship. The years that followed weren't easy. Bill's rising fame, the unrelenting demand for his music, overwhelmed him. But as the world celebrated him, the man left behind felt a deep, aching loneliness, a pain that no amount of time or work could soothe. He had always been there for Bill, ready to back him up, to sing and pray with him. Yet, when the lights grew brighter and the world started to sing Bill's name, he faded into the background, becoming a mere memory in someone else's story. There were moments of resentment, but no bitterness. Not really. Just a quiet sadness that lingered in the spaces between Bill's songs. A sadness that whispered, "I was there. I helped build this. And now I'm forgotten." But he never spoke those words aloud. That wasn't who he was. He wasn't the kind of man to beg for attention or demand answers. He carried his pain in silence, just as Bill had carried his own secret. Deep inside, he missed his friend. No matter how many years passed or how many songs Bill sang, he knew one thing: the bond they shared, the love, the friendship, could never be replaced. Yet, over time, it was being buried beneath the weight of unspoken words and distance. Then Bill spoke his truth. For the first time, the world heard the echo of the man who had been left behind. A man who never stopped caring, never stopped hoping, never stopped wondering what if. They say true friendships never really die. They just wait for the right moment to resurface. After decades of silence, hurt, and regret, that moment finally came. When Bill's confession reached the world, his truth, his apology, his buried sorrow, it did more than heal his heart. It opened a door for something even greater. For the first time in years, the man who had quietly carried his own pain felt like he could breathe again. He had never asked for Bill's apology, never demanded an explanation, but deep down he had always longed for one. And now it had come. The healing wasn't dramatic. There were no public reunions, no tear-filled interviews. It didn't need to be. The healing was simple, quiet, and deeply personal. It happened in a long-overdue phone call between two old friends who had carried so much distance in their hearts, but never lost their love for one another. When Bill finally reached out, his voice trembled with emotion. "I'm sorry," he said, his words raw and humble. "I should have never let you go. I should have never let us drift. I was selfish. I was scared. And I thought if I kept moving forward, I wouldn't have to face what I'd left behind. But I was wrong. I'm sorry." For a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end of the line. But it wasn't the painful silence they had known before. This silence was filled with understanding, a silence born from years of hurt and healing. Then the friend spoke softly, "Bill, I never stopped praying for you. I never stopped believing in you. I knew deep down you'd find your way back. And I forgive you. I always have." Just like that, the years of pain and misunderstanding began to fade into the background. What had once seemed like an insurmountable rift, a friendship lost to time, was now beginning to heal, Not because of grand gestures or public apologies, but because two people who had deeply loved each other were finally honest with one another. The road to redemption was never easy, but it was real. Bill and his friend didn't need to recreate the past. They didn't need to go back to how things were. What they needed was to let go of old regrets and accept that sometimes healing comes in the quiet spaces between the words.